The air inside the auction barn was thick with the scent of money and expectation. Rows of polished boots tapped impatiently on sawdust-covered floors, their owners cloaked in tailored jackets and wide-brimmed hats that gleamed with pride and prestige. Spotlights traced the walking ring, casting elongated shadows as handlers paraded muscular, glossy horses for the judgment of millionaires seated in velvet-cushioned bleachers. A faint hum of whispered bids and murmured appraisals gave the place a church-like reverence, as though salvation might come on four legs. In the farthest corner of the gallery, away from the glare of gold watches and pearl smiles, sat a man who looked out of place. His coat was threadbare, more patches than fabric, and his boots were scuffed and dusty, the leather cracked with years of use. A battered straw had shaded his weathered face, and his gnarled hands rested on his knees, as if he hadn't come to buy, but merely to witness. Most didn't notice him. Those who did dismissed him as a lost wanderer or perhaps a farmhand who'd mistaken the entrance. But the old man's eyes were sharp, locked on the parade with a steady hunger that had nothing to do with money. His name was Elijah Boone, and while his clothes had been sewn too many times and his truck wheezed more than it roared, he carried himself with quiet dignity. 68 years old and long since retired from the world's clamor, Elijah hadn't stepped foot in an auction like this in over a decade. The reason he came today rode heavy on his chest. He had heard whispers that a specific horse might show up, a horse no one else wanted. That was what had stirred him from his lonely ranch tucked into the dry ribs of the Colorado plains. The bidding for Lot 32 had just concluded, some Arabian stallion with a bloodline thick enough to drown in, when the handlers brought out the next. A hush fell, but not the reverent kind. It was confusion. The mare that entered the ring didn't match the others. She was slight, underfed, her coat dull and matted. Her movements were cautious, almost apologetic, as if she expected punishment for every step. One of her ears was nicked at the tip, and a faint scar ran down her flank, nearly invisible under the dust. She wasn't wearing show tack. Her hooves were overgrown. The handler barely bothered to present her, standing off to the side like he wanted no part of the embarrassment. "Who put that one on the list?" A voice muttered nearby. "Must have been a mistake," another replied. "No pedigree. Not even a proper groom." The auctioneer cleared his throat, but didn't look pleased. Lot 33. Mustang mare, approximate age 6. Unbranded. No papers. The murmurs turned sharper now, laced with amusement. A Mustang? Here. Elijah didn't blink. His hands tightened on his knees. No one raised a paddle. The auctioneer waited a beat longer than he usually would. Starting bid, 1,000. Silence. 500. A woman in the third row chuckled, whispering something to her friend. 200. Still nothing. The mare shifted nervously. Her eyes darted across the crowd, like she was trying to find a place to hide. The auctioneer was already moving on. Withdrawn. Next up. 200. Came Elijah's voice, quiet but firm. The man beside him nearly jumped, looking down in surprise. All heads turned. The auctioneer squinted, unsure whether to take it seriously. 200, do I hear 3? Silence again, this time with a note of derision. Sold, the auctioneer said quickly. To the gentleman in the... He hesitated, glancing at Elijah's worn clothes. Back. The mare was led from the ring, and Elijah rose slowly, joints creaking in protest. He moved through the crowd with the kind of deliberate grace only earned through hard labor and heartbreak. People stepped aside, not out of respect, but confusion, like they didn't quite understand what they'd just seen. He met the handler outside the ring. "Where's her paperwork?" "There ain't any," the young man said, shrugging. "No name, no records. Picked her up from a seizure in New Mexico. She's skittish, but not mean. Probably wild most of her life." Elijah nodded. "She got a trailer?" The handler pointed with his thumb. "Back lot. But I wouldn't bother if I were you. She won't give you anything. Nothing but trouble, that one." Elijah's eyes softened as he looked toward the loading area. Most things worth keeping start out that way. He signed the release forms with slow, methodical care and made his way to the trailer. The mare was already inside, standing stiffly in the corner like she expected to be hit. Elijah didn't approach. He stood a few feet away and let the quiet stretch between them. "I don't got much to offer you," he said softly, "but I ain't looking for perfection either." The mayor didn't react. He took off his hat, ran a hand through the steel-gray hair that clung to his scalp in thin wisps, then climbed into the driver's seat of his rusted truck. The engine groaned as it turned over, but it came to life, and soon he was rolling out of the auction grounds, ignored by all but the wind. The drive back to the ranch was long, and dusk settled over the horizon in bands of amber and rose. Elijah spoke now and then, not expecting answers. "I had a good one once. Name was Maddie. Smart, stubborn. Taught me how to listen." He glanced in the rearview mirror at the trailer. "Maybe you'll teach me something too." When they reached the ranch, he parked by the small barn that leaned into the wind like an old man with a cane. The house wasn't much better, peeling paint, cracked windows, but it was home. Elijah opened the trailer, stepping aside to give the mare room. She didn't move at first, just blinked at the unfamiliar surroundings. Then, slowly, she stepped down. Her hooves crunched on the gravel like she'd never felt it before. Maybe she hadn't. He didn't push her toward the corral, just walked beside her at her pace. The gate creaked open, and she walked in with the hesitance of someone expecting betrayal. He let her be. That night, Elijah sat on the porch, sipping weak coffee from a tin mug. The stars came out one by one, shy and pale at first, then bolder. He could see her from where he sat, a dark shape in the moonlight. She hadn't laid down. Still standing. Still unsure. "World's got a way of breaking the soft out of folks," he murmured to the stars. "But sometimes, what's left is strong enough to build on." He wasn't sure why he said it aloud. Maybe to remind himself. The wind picked up, brushing across the dry grass like fingers over a harp. In the corral, the mare turned her head toward the porch. Just for a moment, and Elijah smiled, faint and fleeting. It was a start. The mare didn't come near him for the first week. Elijah never pushed. He kept his distance, watching from the porch as she paced the far side of the corral, like a ghost too wary to settle. She ate only when he left the feed and backed away, and drank when no eyes were on her. Every sound, wind in the trees, rustle of dry grass, creak of the old gate, set her on edge. Her ears flicked like they were tuned to old terrors, and her muscles stayed coiled even in sleep. Elijah named her Juniper, not because she reminded him of the plant, spiny and stubborn, but because she'd arrived with the same quiet resilience as the bush growing by his barn, surviving despite everything the land threw at it. He spent his days working the ranch in silence. There wasn't much left to tend, just a few stubborn goats, a lazy dog named Sully, and the land itself, brittle from years of drought. But it gave him purpose. He mended fences with slow precision, chopped firewood, scrubbed old tools, till they shone like ghosts of better years. And every few hours, he checked on Juniper. Sometimes he talked to her, not like one speaks to a pet, but the way a man speaks to memory. Calm, honest, without expectation. "I used to know a horse who could read my mind," he said one morning, standing by the corral rail. "Maddie. She wasn't mine at first. Took me months to earn her trust. But when she finally looked me in the eye, it was like she saw everything I didn't know how to say." Juniper kept her distance. Her eyes were dark and deep and unreadable. He didn't push. One morning, he found her standing closer to the gate than usual. It wasn't much, 5 feet, maybe, but it was the first change. He pretended not to notice, tipping his hat and walking past like he had somewhere else to be. The next day, she was there again. Closer. Still tense, still ready to flee, but no longer hiding. He started leaving the gate open. Just a crack. The third week, he brought an apple, set it on the post, walked away. She didn't touch it for hours, but she sniffed it, nudged it, knocked it to the ground. He counted that as a win. Day by day, her edges softened, not all at once, and never completely, but enough. She began to watch him with less suspicion. She ate with him nearby, drank while he sat under the cottonwood tree, humming to himself. Once, she even stepped toward him, just 2 strides, before the sound of Sully barking sent her skittering back. That night, Elijah lit the fire early and sat on the porch until stars dusted the sky. He cradled a photo in his hands, weathered, sun-faded. A woman with windblown hair and laugh lines sat on a horse with her arm around a younger version of him. "Marie would have liked you," he murmured to the picture. "She always had a soft spot for the wild ones." The wind whispered through the trees. He didn't cry. Not anymore. But his throat stayed tight until the fire died down. The next morning, Juniper let him touch her for the first time. It wasn't graceful. She flinched when his hand neared her cheek, snorted hard enough to kick up dust. But she didn't bolt. His fingers brushed her fur, coarse, sun-roughened, and for a second she froze. Then relaxed. It was like pressing your hand against a heartbeat. After that, everything changed. Slowly, like ice thawing, she began to follow him along the fence line. Not close, but near enough to feel intentional. He introduced her to a halter. No pressure, just the weight of it draped across the rail. Then he looped it near her neck, let it rest there for minutes at a time. When she didn't protest, he slipped it over her head. She didn't fight. The first time he led her around the paddock, it felt like dancing with a stranger who didn't yet trust the music. Her steps were hesitant, confused. She balked, turned away, circled back. But she listened, not with her ears. Those still twitched at every sound, but with something deeper, buried beneath the scars and the silence. He spoke to her throughout, his voice soft as creek water. "You got a good walk," he said once, walking backward, leading her gently. "Sturdy legs. You carry your weight like someone who's had to do it alone." That night, she ate from his hand. Sully, watching from the porch, tilted his head as if impressed. By the 6th week, Elijah opened the gate and walked her into the wide pasture that stretched behind the barn. It hadn't seen much use in years, fences broken in places, weeds crawling through the grass, but the space was open, honest. Juniper sniffed the wind like it carried memory. Then, without warning, she bolted. Elijah didn't chase. He just leaned on the post and watched her run, her legs stretched with newfound strength, hooves pounding the dry soil like thunder in a sun-bleached sky. She wasn't galloping from fear. This was something else. The joy of motion, the relief of unburdened speed. She ran in wide loops, tail high, neck arched. When she finally slowed, she came to a stop not far from him. Her sides heaved, nostrils flared, but her eyes found his. Not frightened, curious. He smiled. "You needed that." In the days that followed, he began riding her. Bareback at first, just light pressure, soft voice. She resisted, but not angrily. More like someone unsure of how to be guided. He never pushed past her limits. Just gave her space to learn, to decide. There were missteps. One morning, she bucked hard enough to send him sprawling into the dust. He lay there for a moment, blinking at the sky. Then he laughed, a deep, raspy thing that echoed off the barn. "All right then," he said, brushing himself off. "You got opinions." She snorted from the other side of the corral. Each day brought new trust. A small step, then another. She began meeting him at the gate, resting her muzzle on his shoulder, following him even when the feed bucket was empty. He caught himself talking more. About Marie. About the ranch when it used to be alive with sound. About the letter he got last month offering to buy the land. About how he'd almost said yes. "But I couldn't do it," he said one evening, sitting on a hay bale while Juniper grazed nearby. "Not after you came along. This place, maybe it still matters." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the pasture. Juniper walked over and nuzzled his arm. He stilled, then reached up and rested his hand on her cheek. They stayed like that until the light faded. That night, a storm rolled in. Wind howled through the trees, lightning fractured the sky, and rain hit the roof in waves. Elijah sat by the window, watching. Juniper paced the paddock, agitated. She didn't like being confined when the wind rose like that. Reminded her of something, maybe. Elijah opened the back door, letting the rain wash across the porch. He walked barefoot to the paddock and opened the gate. Juniper hesitated, then bolted into the storm. He didn't stop her, just stood there, soaked to the bone, watching her disappear into the black. He didn't call, didn't chase. "She'll come back," he whispered, not sure if he believed it. Morning came gray and silent. The rain had stopped, but the land was slick and pockmarked. Elijah walked the pasture, boots sinking into mud, calling her name once, just once. She didn't answer. His throat tightened, but as he turned toward the barn, a shape appeared on the ridge. Juniper. Matted, soaked, muddy, but proud. She walked down the slope with deliberate grace, head held high. She came to him, stopped within inches. He raised a hand. She leaned in. "I missed you too," he said, voice rough. It was more than a reunion. It was a vow. That night, he hung the bridle on the barn wall, not as decoration, but as invitation. She looked at it, then looked at him. Tomorrow, he thought. Maybe tomorrow. The morning sun rolled across the pasture like honey, soft and golden. Elijah stood in the doorway of the barn, leaning against the frame, a mug of lukewarm coffee in one hand, watching Juniper graze peacefully. There was a calmness in the way she moved now, measured and unhurried. Her coat had grown thick and healthy. The hollowness in her flanks had vanished. Even her eyes, once rimmed with shadow and suspicion, now shimmered with something gentler. But change was never still, and peace never stayed long on the ranch. It was a Thursday when the first truck came. Dust bloomed in its wake as it rolled up the gravel drive, a glossy thing far too new for a place this weathered. Elijah narrowed his eyes. He didn't recognize the vehicle, but he knew the type. Smooth tires, tinted windows, the kind of ride that didn't come alone. Two men stepped out, suits pressed clean. One held a leather folder, the other, a cell phone that never left his ear. They looked around like they were already calculating the square footage, the acreage, the resale value of the soil beneath their boots. "Elijah Cross?" the folder holder asked, glancing at the house like it offended him. Elijah didn't answer right away. He sipped his coffee and watched Juniper raise her head from the grass. Her ears pricked toward the newcomers, legs tense beneath her. "Depends who's asking." "Mr. Cross, I'm here on behalf of Emberlane Properties. We made you an offer on this land some months ago. Generous, I might add." "You did," Elijah said quietly. "And we never heard back." He looked down at the chipped enamel of his mug, then back up at the man. "Wasn't looking to sell." "You should reconsider," the man said, stepping closer. "Your property sits on a water-rich subbed aquifer. Developers are lining up for land like this. We're willing to increase the offer. Cash. Quick close." Juniper stepped closer to the fence now, eyeing the men. Elijah saw the way her muscles tightened. She didn't trust them, and neither did he. "Appreciate it," he said. "But this land's not just dirt to me." The second man, still on his phone, finally looked up. "Think about your age, Mr. Cross. What comes next? This place won't care for itself forever." Elijah looked past them, out toward the hills where wild grass swayed. He thought of the night Marie died, how still everything had been, and how this place, broken as it was, had kept breathing even when he couldn't. "I ain't leaving," he said simply. The men shared a glance. One closed the folder with an irritated snap. "We'll give you time to reconsider. But do understand, progress doesn't wait for sentiment." They left a business card on the porch and drove away, tires crunching the gravel like bones. That night, he didn't say much. He sat beside Juniper in the pasture until the stars stretched overhead. She rested her head against his shoulder like she understood something unspoken, something final. Weeks passed. The developers didn't give up. First came more letters, then a registered notice about land surveys. Then, one morning, a crew in orange vests arrived, poking flags into the outer fields like they owned them. Elijah kicked one of the flags loose with the toe of his boot and handed it back. "No one gave permission," he said. The surveyor shrugged. "We've got orders." "You've got a gate too," Elijah said. "Use it on your way out." They left, but not before muttering something about legal steps and forced transitions. Elijah didn't sleep that night. He walked the fence line in the dark, lantern swinging in his hand. Juniper followed him like a shadow. The wind rustled the grass. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. The next morning, he knew what he had to do. He saddled Juniper for the first time. She didn't protest. She stood still while he tightened the cinch and adjusted the stirrups. Her eyes stayed steady, ears flicking with curiosity. When he mounted, she shifted slightly, just enough to remind him she hadn't forgotten what she'd once feared. But she didn't fight. They rode. Across the pasture, through the narrow trail that wound up behind the ridge. The world unfolded around them, raw, untamed, beautiful. The sun rose over the hills like fire, painting everything in golden defiance. Elijah hadn't ridden in years. His body ached, muscles complaining, but his spirit stirred, like old coals reigniting. At the summit, he dismounted. Juniper pawed the ground beside him. "I brought you here for a reason," he said quietly, resting his hand on her neck. "If they take this land, I want you to know what they'll never own." Below them, the valley stretched wide. Rolling fields, winding streams, trees clinging to the last colors of autumn. It wasn't much to anyone else, but to him it was everything. Juniper exhaled, long and low. They stood like that for a long time. Word spread about the auction weeks later. Not the kind with horses or cattle, but the kind where land is divvied up in secret and sold behind signatures. Elijah heard about it from Clara, May at the general store. "They're claiming you defaulted on taxes you never owed," she said, handing him a receipt. "Whole thing's crooked. You should fight it." He nodded, eyes distant. "I will." He didn't have much left. The bank had drained most of his accounts years ago, and the only things of value he owned were rusted or breathing. But that was the thing about resolve. You couldn't buy it, couldn't sell it either. Elijah rode into town on Juniper the morning of the hearing. Heads turned, not because of her, though she was striking now, proud and clean, but because of him, the old man who'd gone silent after his wife died, the one they all thought had given up. He walked into the courthouse like he was walking into battle, and in a way he was. The hearing was swift, legalese flying like sharp knives. The developers had a lawyer with a voice like syrup and papers a foot thick. Elijah had a folded notebook and a photograph. When the judge asked if he had anything to add, Elijah stood. "I got a story," he said. The room stilled. "I bought a horse a few months back. She was half-starved, jumpy, good for nothing, they said. Same way folks talk about this land. Like it's worn out, spent." He held up the photo of Marie and him on horseback, smiles bright against a dusty horizon. "I watched this land give her peace. I watched it raise animals and feed families. I watched it break, sure, but I also watched it heal." He paused. "I didn't come here to beg. I came to say it's worth saving, even if no one sees the value but me." He walked out without waiting for a ruling. 2 days later, a letter came. The judge had ruled in his favor. Something about improper filings. Conflict of interest. The sale was void. The land was safe. Elijah stood in the pasture that night, breathing in the wind. Juniper stood beside him, calm and certain. They weren't what anyone expected. Not fast. Not rich. Not shiny. But they endured. One morning, months later, a boy came up the drive. Maybe 12. Thin, nervous. A cut across his cheek like life hadn't been kind. Elijah met him at the gate. "You the one with the horse?" the boy asked. "I might be," Elijah said. The boy looked at Juniper, who stood at a distance, watching quietly. "She's beautiful." Elijah smiled. "She didn't used to be. Took a while to find herself." The boy nodded. "Can I learn?" Elijah looked at him for a long moment. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "Wear boots." The boy grinned, and as he ran off, Juniper trotted up beside Elijah, bumping her head against his shoulder. "You got more to teach," Elijah whispered, patting her neck. And she did. So did he.